How are you?
and with physics, but not of iconology. So,
Well, it's. I wonder. You have a doctorate in physics, and sometimes I wonder how other people operate. The complicated technology. This is sort of like you're a rocket scientist.
well, I have been. The problem is that science, physics in particular, is observationally related to fixed laws, whereas the updates of Instagram, etc., have no fixed laws.
Both metaphorically and literally.
Yes, yes.
Well, let me ask you. I want to thank you again for giving us your time. You're in the middle of a pretty intense campaign for Florida's third. How's the campaign going? What are the big challenges coming up? Let's start talking about your campaign, and then I want to talk about some local, and then, if you don't mind, some national issues.
Oh, the national issues are the local issues, really. I mean, the pandemic, the destitution of small businesses and the working class, the reduced pay in many cases for essential workers, and increased risk. Some companies are doing well, but many are not. And that is unconscionable. In fact, Amazon has not decided to make their own mask, although they have 6 times as many employees as American Airlines, which is why they're losing enormous amounts of money, making their own masks, making their own personal protection equipment for their employees. Amazon is making $1 billion a day, but can't afford to provide protective equipment for their employees. We can't afford to give them a little bit more leeway in keeping some separation. The greed is palpable.
So,
but
questions questions come up. I'm going to get to those questions in a bit. How are things on the ground with your campaign? How has your campaign adjusted to social distancing? What measures have you guys taken? And is it making campaigning harder, or is it making it easier to campaign given COVID-19 and its dangers?
Oh, my own team on the ground closed down a day before Bernie closed down the whole network. We had been, the whole team, knocking doors for Bernie because that's in March that we have the Florida primary. We were knocking doors for Bernie and myself, which actually turned out to be a very powerful messaging system, because Bernie's important, but without a Congress to support him, he will be inconsequential. He will stop the fascistization of this country, which is critical, or he would have. God, I keep dreaming that we're not done with this yet. August is a long way away in terms of the changes that the world and this nation in particular are going through, and November is yet further.
We got a long way to go. That's true. I want to sort of jump to another question. I voted for Biden. The primaries, I'm more of a sort of in the last primary, I voted for Clinton. I respect Senator Sanders. I never thought he would be the right candidate. But now, question comes to mind. Given the national energy right now, the protest movement for Black Lives Matter, for social justice, do you think Bernie would have been a better option to lead the campaign?
Absolutely. And he is still a better option. He would decidedly defeat Trump. He would have decidedly defeated Trump in 2016. The DNC, you can only infer by their actions, which are transparent, that they are under instructions from their corporate masters that anyone is better than Bernie. That in terms of the corporate oligarchs who actually rule this country and who are being rewarded with trillions of dollars for everyone else's destitution, Bernie is a disaster, because Bernie would have done all those things which the other countries of Western Europe, despite early mistakes, have done. They have got measures of containment underway for the pandemic. They have not had unemployment surge because they put their money into wage support and support for small businesses, whereas we have 42 million new unemployed to join their brothers in unemployment. And of course, their brothers in unemployment have been
brothers and sisters.
And sisters. I'm using Martin Luther King's brothers.
Right, I get that. No, I know that. But we got brothers, we got sisters, we got, in between,
Well, no,
and I know Tom Wells is one of the most progressive people I know. So I'm just, I'm not politically correcting you. I'm just saying. And when it comes down to taking an honest day's earning home, there's no difference between a man and a woman and a child and a teenager and an old man or an old woman. We're all on this together. But Tom, I want to sort of, because as we come from different wings of the Democratic Party, we share some very core values, but we also disagree on mostly foreign policy, but some key issues. And our understanding and our calculation was Bernie is not electable. Yeah, Bernie can win New York, can win Vermont, can win Connecticut and California, but I need to win Pennsylvania. I need to win the Rust Belt. I need to get votes in Minnesota, Wisconsin. I need to win in Michigan. And part of it was, the word socialist.
I noticed the Medicare for All polls exceptionally well.
That's where I was going to go. I was going to say that sometimes I think a part of Bernie's message that we thought was venomous politically, and poisonous politically.
I had been campaigning in Florida CD3,
right,
which has one liberal college town, Gainesville, in UF is a great school.
They have a terrible football team, so I don't follow.
Well, the Greater Gators, whatever.
I'm a Pac-12 guy. I've Florida. I've heard of them. They might have a football team. They might have won a couple of national championships. I'm not an SEC guy.
When I see the band practicing for sports events, I'm thinking Team Florida, the bicycle team. I've been a cyclist for 40 years. I gave up football back when I was 12.
But the issues, our main issue with Bernie Sanders was electability.
That is a fictitious issue. Actually, I think the most fundamental attack on Bernie, the most effective attack, was Bernie, you'll never be able to get those things done. Now, let us unpack that for a moment. We'll come back to electability per se after this. So when you look at you will never get those things done, what it means is after you are elected president, no matter how overwhelmingly you are elected, and no matter how many Democrats you pulled into the House and Senate, that they will not vote for the things that you ran on and that you have a large mandate to do. And why will they not vote for them? Because 90% of the present House Democrats and all of the Republicans, and the same in the Senate, are elected with corporate funds and are dependent upon their corporate donors to get reelected. And that is why the most fundamental part of my campaign is to do the first thing, which is public funding of election at a value that will allow people to be competitive dollar-wise in every district and in every federal race. And that dollar competitiveness is not even necessary, but it's to give us an overwhelming advantage so we create fast changes very quickly, because the end of the world is coming, and I'm talking about climate crisis. What we should be doing right now, what we could be doing tomorrow, is rising out of the pandemic on the wings of applied science and restoring the economy on the back of solar panels. We're spending trillions of dollars to restore the economy. You spend $6 or $7 trillion. That's a third of Bernie's incomprehensible Green New Deal plan, which was $17 trillion. And you're spending that to bail out the corporations who are dependent upon the people who are presently unemployed and are about to declare rent bankruptcy, and the Gap is on the strings for bankruptcy right now. All the small companies, meaning billion-dollar companies, are in risk of losing all their real estate. The commercial real estate market was already packaging, bundling, and distorting the ratings of commercial property before the pandemic. The guarantee right now is that we continue this way for another month or two, and there will be another bank failure, a tremendous, much more expensive than the business failure 2 months ago. That was a $5 trillion bailout effectively. The bank one will be bigger in the same year. That's how wealth is formed in this country. We had the 2008, now we have two of them in 2020, I project, and the wealth accumulates at the top at the cost of crushing the working class. But this time the working class will be crushed to death, and we will have a French Revolution situation, which is basically what we're seeing in the racial justice arena right now.
Well, I mean, that is, I'm not sure if I agree with that, but if things get violent, I don't think we're going to be on the winning side. We're not, the people who are, I think there are certain violent elements in this country, and they're not in our movements. And those who, and they have access to arms and ammunition, let's put it this way. I'm just not sure that sort of, even predicting violence that way would help our cause in any way.
I am not speaking of advocating this in
no,
any.
I'm not saying advocating. I'm just saying I don't think we're close.
Speaking of what is likely to happen.
I know you're not advocating, but I don't even think that's likely to happen because I think still civil society in this country is so strong that we can withstand these waves. But there's also so much injustice that society can withstand. So that's a very accurate and fair point. I want to. What's next? I mean, this conversation took a very interesting turn. What's next? What are the real, tangible, doable, operational, actionable sort of steps we can take from now to November and November and on to actually make things better?
Let's look at the highly implausible best case progress from this point. We have never had a president who wished to form a fascist dictatorship, but there's very little possible interpretation other than that. His reaction to every event is, how can I make it benefit me? And he has surrounded himself a whole administration of sycophants, generally white old males who have white privilege as a cover for complete incompetence, and the people below them have been replaced to the point, and their listening abilities compromise anyone who's left so that nothing positive happens. If it were not for sheer incompetence, we would not have a death toll in this pandemic. We would have actually implemented the travel ban that Trump announced, but 42,000 people have come in from Wuhan since that travel ban was announced. 68,000 arrived in New York on March 12th to respond to the closure, the shutdown of travel from Europe that was announced by tweet by our very well coordinated president, who didn't mention it to anybody.
You're questioning his ability to come up with policy in a coherent way and enforce it. I mean, he's proven time after time that he's running a pretty tight ship.
Oh yeah, it's a tight ship, and it's getting smaller and smaller, and all the rats are leaving.
Time to that. Cheers to that. Yep.
Yes.
That is very true. Unfortunately, it's getting smaller and smaller, but there's a lot of. It's also got more holes in it than the. I don't want to. I'm trying to think of some bad navy, but I don't want to mention any country. Let's say it's got more holes in it than the Trump bathtub.
Now, one of the advantages that I find in Trump's whole administrative incompetence is that they've been trying to do a violent overthrow President Maduro, who's not the best president in the world, but he was popularly elected by a very legitimate electoral process, and they have failed to throw him out of office. They did throw out the guy in Ecuador, and partly
Evo Morales was Bolivia.
Right.
And I would disagree on sort of our policy towards Maduro. That's where the Democratic Party splits on foreign policy. We have, but yes, keep going.
Elections should be respected rather than annihilated. And elections, the will of the people in another country should prevail sometimes.
I agree, but sometimes when someone says you vote one man, one vote, but only once, and then that person with, be it Mohamed Morsi of Egypt or Maduro starts quenching and quelling civil liberties and cracking down on the civil society, and then there is a legitimate movement against those folks. I think, but again, that's where you and I disagree on.
More deeply understanding of the 1953 CIA abuse of the election that was wholly legitimate, the very popular Mossadegh, President Mossadegh, who was killed while thrown out of office.
He was just thrown out. Prime Minister Mossadegh was overthrown by coup, right? No, but I understand. American intervention hasn't always been as fruitful as we had sort of thought it would be. On the other hand, sometimes
you had stock in British Petroleum, and they did really well with our destruction of democracy in Iran. And then we complained in 1979 and 70.
You're right, 79, yeah.
When Ayatollah took power, because there was no democratic force, there was a court revolution against the American Shah. So it had to be an unattractive revolution, just like the unattractive revolution in Cuba with Castro, the unattractive revolution in Venezuela, the unattractive political revolution in Chile that we killed Allende in 73. You know what day that revolution was actually started on? 1973 is the year. The day was 9/11.
That was the day we killed, Pinochet killed Allende in Chile.
And that day is known as the Night of Knives in
Chile, yeah. But I don't want to get into sort of a historic debate on this, but I think in the context of the Cold War, and in the context of the Cold War, the U.S. was always worried about allowing either socialist or communist-leaning forces to align with the Soviet Union. Now, we made mistakes when we thought a progressive nationalist, and nationalist not in a right-wing bad way, in a progressive sort of patriotic, we thought someone like Mohamed Mossadegh, who was a democratically elected man, who also allowed the communists to operate, but he had zero sympathies with the communists, but he said, it's a free country. We sacked it.
What country was that?
Iran. This is 1951 to 53. But our fear was Mossadegh leaning towards the communists. And also our fear was Allende or you name it. But then we get rid of, we help Pinochet to get rid of Allende. And then for the next 18 to 21 years until he leaves in 88, 89? Yeah, 15 years. We are blamed for everything that happened. The Chicago boys and you name it. I mean, there are real issues. So we have made miscalculations, but just think of the other side.
Taking down the economy in Argentina, and that is pretty much the same thing that's being done in America in certain senses. Now, the most damaging parts of Trump's administration, frankly, are his opportunistic reveling in the pandemic. It is being used for small-scale profiteering by Kushner with the personal protection equipment, which he used as a protection racket. You have to cough up money, and we'll let you have the masks that we seized at the airport after you bought them. And the governors and the mayors should take care of things. And when they do, when they buy and find PPE, it was being seized by the FBI and taken to national warehouses where they would sell to the highest bidder. They would sell to the highest bidder the stuff that was bought by the governor, by the hospital, by the mayors, and
Kushner and Ivanka have been running a racket, and this is not the first time, won't be the last time. Unfortunately, part of our disagreements, our issues with Trump is not just personality and not just policy, it's the rule of law. And it's the rule of law.
Absolutely. So that's the small scale, but the large scale.
Dr. Wells, 1 second. Can you imagine, for instance, so he appointed his son-in-law as the COVID-19 czar. He appointed the son-in-law as Mideast peace chief. Can you imagine if, I think I mentioned this before, Dwight Eisenhower, President Franklin, FDR would have appointed his son-in-law as Supreme Allied Commander of Forces in Europe. Or if Dwight Eisenhower would have appointed his son-in-law as, I don't know, head of the Central Intelligence Agency.
The
list goes on and on. Abraham Lincoln, instead of appointing General, Ulysses S. Grant, would have appointed his son-in-law as the General of the Union Army. I mean, you think about this, the ridiculousness, the sycophancy, the corruption that goes on. Again, this is not just sort of the issue of political differences and policy differences. I think this man in particular, President Donald Trump, and Kushner and Ivanka and the people in the Trump family are corrupt. And the wheels of justice move slowly, but eventually there will be litigation. And now, right now, they're in a protected position.
The Martin Luther King quote is that the arc of justice bends towards justice, but it doesn't bend without you working really hard to bend it.
Yes.
Yes. There was a question that flashed by here, or a comment, which was, Trump is your president, deal with it. So, yes,
we're trying to get him unelected. We're trying to vote for somebody else.
I am very concerned that in November he will reject the results of the election, which would be pretty overwhelmingly opposed to him by that point, because he cannot constitutionally do anything that was not his idea. He cannot allow the epidemiologists to deal with the epidemic and control it by tracking and containment. He cannot do anything that doesn't give money to the people at the top or does give money to the working class, because he's been abusing the working class in every contract he has written in his whole life. The advantage that a developer has is that he moves from one place to another, so he never has to deal with the same people twice because they don't like him. But deal with Trump. The thing which I wanted to speak to, which is wildly optimistic, but I hope there are a few hundred congressmen listening right now. Yeah, I'm expecting that's unlikely. And
no, but when we post this stuff, we got pretty good traction.
So what is needed? The only nonviolent revolution that is still possible, in my humble opinion, is not, but this one is possible, is for the rank and file members of both parties in the House and Senate to recognize that the people who are their neighbors are desperate, and the businesses owned by their neighbors are failing, and that this is intentional. This is maximizing the disruption in a catastrophic economic event and having the neoliberal economists jump in and say, we got to save the banks. The banks have no product. They produce nothing. They are not in any way part of capitalism. They are part of the oligarchy. And if they fail, well, gee, that's what capitalism is about. You take risk. The people working in America, the risk should not include dying of starvation because the agriculture department did not provide for redistribution of produce in billions of dollars of quantity. 40% of our produce goes to restaurants, and the restaurants did not take any produce, so it was plowed under the ground. In Florida, 500 million was plowed under the ground already. We may face food shortages or be importing food in the next 2 or 3 months.
And I'm not trying to justify this, but I'm saying justification would be that if they distributed that food, the prices would have fallen so sharply that it would have made no sense for the local farmer to farm. I mean, that's the justification provided.
Well,
what do you think? I can already tell you're not buying into that.
People have to have food. Plowing it into the ground has to be averted. The Department of Agriculture had funds to deal with this problem. They decided even now not to use all those funds. And in fact, it may get worse, but that's why you have a Congress with financial authority. But they have sent $1,200 to support people for the last 12 weeks. Not entirely generous. On the other hand, the spigot that directs money upward is opened up at a $1 million per second rate. This is ridiculous. And the revolution in Congress. I diverted myself with agriculture and starvation. I mean, what's the big deal? People starving. Apparently, that is the attitude in Congress.
That's a big deal.
The leadership of Congress is still so. They got to be leaders in Congress, both parties, because they were really good at fundraising, and you get really good at fundraising because you comply with the wishes of those who are funding you. And everyone in Congress, as we commented earlier, has been elected 90+% of them by corporate donations. We give them the option of public funding to get reelected, and we say, think about just taking over. You have the ability in the House and the Senate, if the majority and 2/3 of the Senate come together, extraordinarily unlikely, but very nearly essential if we're going to preserve our place in the world. You can come together, you can file a new article of impeachment, a misdemeanor, actually a pretty large misdemeanor, using the troops to walk across the street, sack both Pence and Trump in the same moment the Speaker of the House becomes president. That can be done in one day.
Explain that one more time. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I got. I'm trying to understand the legal mechanism behind this.
And write an article of impeachment. We've established in the previous impeachment that testimony and witnesses are not necessary.
So you're saying, okay, we already have. Okay, I understand what you're saying. So you're saying re-impeach the president.
Put on different charges. Mm-hmm. You don't need. They didn't require any testimony in the Senate. Why should they require any this time? In the morning, the House, they walk over the article written in pencil on a piece of paper, and the Senate convicts them that afternoon. Before you do that, you need to put a person as Speaker of the House that you would like to be president. Now, if you read the Constitution carefully, and I take the word of people who have done that, then you lawyers, for example, there is no.
I know a lawyer. I know a couple of lawyers. I know one or two.
Well, then there's no requirement that the Speaker of the House be a member of the House. So anyone can be the Speaker of the House. Bernie can be the Speaker of the House. Bernie could be the president 2 days from now. He could bring in his own team, which would not have anyone from Goldman Sachs. It would have people who actually care about people. He has a full staff, a full team. He has a full program. And his program is a little bit more substantial than Biden's, which in the racial justice category says, maybe we can train the police to shoot people in the legs. No. That is not a halfway house. That is nothing. That is, we will do more of the same, because I didn't think about that. And my whole team didn't think about that. Even though we have racial riots going across the country in 9 days, we can't think about those things. We're only worried about getting the election. We're trying to get a volunteer. Can we get one volunteer? I have on my campaign 56 volunteers who are working for free.
That's amazing.
no paid staff, and they're not all in CD3. The campaign that I am promoting, that is my campaign, is a powerful campaign of national interest, and it has got the attention of people across the country and even in other countries. That's my team. We are perfectly adapted to the digital world, except for joining Instagram.
No, your team has done an amazing job in a little amount of time, but with and you don't accept corporate donations, you don't get corporate resources, you don't want it. You would, even if they reached out to you, you would shun them. But the question is, let me ask you. We have limited time, so I want to get to a couple more questions before we leave for today. But is it better not to get corporate? I'm just going to be very pragmatic here. Is it?
Yeah.
Would you turn away large donations from individuals or corporate interests, but win and have another Democrat in the House named Tom Wells,
Yes.
whom I know has very progressive values, has a good heart and is a good man, as opposed to, well, I don't want to take corporate donations, but we're going to send the same Joe Schmo
I think it was
Congress.
a cowboy western movie where the hero is coming, has a baby, and he needs to take it to the next town. The mother has been killed, and he needs to get across the desert to the next town and find someone to take care of the baby. And he gets to a well which is marked as poisoned. And he figures, I have to drink the water and I will die if I get to the next town. But getting to the next town is how you save the baby. And the baby is the whole world right now. The climate and the pandemic are related.
But Tom, none of that would matter if you
Well,
don't get Democrats elected.
The other side of that analogy, in response to your question, is yes, I could take poison to get there and do something, and I know that it would not corrupt me because I already had the plan of I'm trying to uncorrupt it, to use nonviolent means in the House and the Senate to create redemption. That is exactly what Martin Luther King said. The end is
so. Today the issue of time is always. I wish I could have you for 6-7 hours in a row. We could just sit and talk about everything. But
on Zoom.
We should do this more often. We should actually try to do weekly events with Tom Wells. So I can ask. But who would you reach out to? Whom would you reach out across the aisle? Who would you think, if you have any names or any particular districts, but on the Republican side of the House, are there any characters, any individuals, any members that you think would be good allies for the cause?
Well, what I read, I'm looking for this, so it strikes me, even though it may be just a single sentence in an article, I'm looking for people to begin to recognize that this is serious. This is not just taking some 3 million houses away from people like in 2008. This is taking the apartments away from them that they moved into and having those apartments become part of the bank failure. And someone like Mnuchin, who made his billion off of illegal foreclosures in California because the Attorney General figured they didn't have enough money in the budget to prosecute all those cases. I don't know why they didn't just prosecute one. Oh, I do know, because Michigan has $1 billion. Billionaires.
It buys you a lot of goodwill.
They rule the whole Congress and the whole DNC and the whole RNC. But the DNC has had to come out from behind the cover because Bernie Sanders' campaign was the first realistic threat to the oligarchy in the last 20 or 30 years. And so their corruption, their manipulation of the elections at every level and in every state to varying degrees, because the state parties are responsive in varying degrees to actual public sentiment, which is what they're supposed to represent. If I hadn't stated the details of my public funding plan, but somehow you will notice in a couple of sentences that the DNC would not play any role. That they would have no objective reason for existence because every voter would get the $200 voucher. This is exactly the same thing Kirsten Gillibrand said.
Gillibrand, yeah, from the senator from the state of New York, correct.
In the first debate, and she said, until you pass this, nothing else will ever pass. Nothing we've talked about would ever pass. But she didn't speak about how to get it passed. This $200 voucher can be given only to candidates, any party, any affiliation, any philosophical bent, who take nothing except that. So on that basis, the voter who is homeless would have the same input as Mnuchin, or whatever his name is,
Stephen Mnuchin,
into the electoral process. The electoral process is not the vote in November, it's who gets on the ballot. And you get on the ballot by winning the primary. You get to win the primary by having enough money to compete against the corporate tools that are running against you. $200 per voter is about $140 million per district. And you take out some for the Senate campaigns and some for the presidential campaigns, but you still have a whale of a lot of money and available in every district. Plenty to win. We have seen, but very few people notice it. It's never talked about because it's so objectionable to the status quo. To note that in Connecticut they have had public funding of elections for 20 years, and with very minuscule funding levels, like $21 million for the whole state in 2016, they have elected 75% of both houses of their state legislature for the last 20 years. Now, they are repeatedly trying to suppress that, even the people who are elected that way, because it's more fun to get the big. I don't know why. But when people start looking at their voters as who can get them reelected instead of having to manipulate the votes through the press, through talking points that the lobbyists have provided, it's much easier to say, would you like to pay this much? Yeah, I got to get my head on the screen. And have co-pays and deductibles and have the doctor and find out when you get the disease whether this treatment is covered or not, or whether this doctor and procedure are covered, or would you rather pay this much and have access to every doctor in the country and know that it will be fully paid for with no copays and no deductibles and no concern about pre-existing conditions?
How dare you trying to give people health care? How dare you? You're trying to destroy this country by giving people health care?
We're paying for it already.
We're paying more than anybody else for it already. We're paying
right,
more than anybody, and we're not getting anything in return. That's the problem, folks. No one's saying you're going to wait in line. No one's saying Stalin is going to give you a physical every year. Those of us who've seen other systems of healthcare know that the advantages greatly outnumber and outweigh the disadvantages. And guess what? Some people got to deal with their greed. Bottom line, the corporations, the health insurance companies, pharmaceuticals, yes, they bring a lot of innovation. On the other hand, yeah, you can deal with 40 billion. You can handle $40 billion of profits instead of $48 billion of profits. That should be enough. Let's put it this way. I mean, I think on the issue of healthcare, again, you and I come from very different wings of the Democratic Party. On the other hand, there are some core beliefs and core fundamentals. I think healthcare should be a human right. I don't think just because you're sick or old or young or poor or rich or white or black or brown or this or that, you should not have access to healthcare. You come get healthcare, you should be covered. You should be covered fully. And guess what? Those of us who can afford it, if you want to buy additional whatever, go for it. But everything from A to Z should be covered by a single payer healthcare system. I'm all with you.
You're qualified to be on my intern team.
I'd be a little underqualified to be an intern. I'll be there arguing with you all day.
What? No.
I don't hold the stacks of the campaign, so that's my problem. I'll be hitting all the stacks. So that's don't keep junk food around me. Tom, I want to ask one more question because we're running out of time. I've been asked this, and I want to ask you now, as I get to know your campaign better and I get to know you better, and this is and I really wish you success. Again, folks, this is the beauty of this big party. It's the Democratic Party. We have political views from Bernie Sanders and Tom Wells all the way to people who left the party, such as Joseph Lieberman, or people who are still currently in the party, like Hillary Clinton. So we go from very progressive to what you would call center right. So we have that and the idea is to try to bring as many people under this tent and also win elections and also get things done for the middle class and for the lower class. What would be your first top legislative agenda as soon as you get to Congress? You get to the House of Representatives, first legislative agenda.
Well, it's twofold. It hadn't been done by that time. We passed public funding of health care and public funding of elections. The public funding of health care would be done single-payer health care. I've worked with not Milton Friedman, Gerald Friedman.
I was going to say, yeah, you and Milton would not have gone, yes.
Not a good match.
Is that the day you set Stanford on fire? Because me and Milton Friedman, yeah, you would have been,
I won there. I missed that one. But my friend Gerald Friedman.
I'll remember that, though. Next time you bring that up, I said, how's Milton Friedman, by the way? So, he passed away, but folks, Milton Friedman, Nobel laureate, very much on the other side of economic views than Dr. Wells. He was a supply-side economics guy.
Buchanan, not as far as James Buchanan. But Gerald Friedman is actually a very good guy, not a criminal.
I see. That's. I mean, I have a lot. I have a lot of respect for Lane Nelson, but I disagree with a lot of his supply-side economics.
And he's made a speciality of the transition between present healthcare system in America and a single-payer healthcare system. And he has written a very long and detailed analysis with a couple hundred references. I trust him on those, which speaks to how to convert New York State in a single year to single-payer healthcare. He's actually done the same plans for several other states with minor variations. And the savings that he projects amount, when you escalate to the whole country, to $1 trillion a year. Now, the whole country is easier to do in 1 year than a single state, which may seem obscure, but in the whole country, you will do this because you will have the president being a progressive Democrat, and he would use his authority, as Nixon did back in about 69 or 70, to open immigration specifically to doctors and medical personnel from Korea in Nixon's case. And if you open it to people from all over the world and you make being a doctor in America attractive, which will be much more attractive if the welfare of the patient, the well-being of the patient, becomes again the concern of the doctor rather than the enforced concern of producing profit for the hospital. The nonprofit hospitals are highly profitable because the accounting rules have been changed by our Congress so that that can be achieved. We have multiple layers of corruption, 40 plus years of law writing by corporations. You do this in a single year and you have public funding of elections, 2 years out, everybody will know that all the lies that they were told to them were actually lies, and that they have been treated better. They don't know anybody who's lost their house to medical expenses because there are none. If your father is having chemotherapy and you have to also try to consider whether you keep the house or you give him treatments, that is not a choice that arises in any other country. So everybody will love the people who voted for the single-payer health care, and they will re-elect them with the public funding of elections. And that will be the systematic change, because once you get accustomed to making people happy and doing what you always knew was right, private prisons for profit will vanish ICE will vanish.
That is such a whole. We should discuss that at a later talk. But private prison systems and privatization of the prison and the sort of correctional systems has been a disaster. A disaster.
It was designed to be a disaster. They are abusing people in those prisons in order to free repeat customers. The objective of any prison system, any system of incarceration, is not punishment. It's rehabilitation. You don't punish people and expect them to get out and contribute to society. You don't punish them on a daily basis. This is insane. We have an insane system straight up and down.
But we have hope, and we have people like yourself, and we have a lot of great candidates in this race and different races across the country. Tom Wells, Dr. Tom Wells, and Professor Tom Wells. You have. I was looking at your CV. You got quite an amazing CV, but we're just gonna call you Tom if that's okay. So Tom, thank you very much. Wish you all the success, and we're gonna have you on again because there is I wish I had another hour to go over prison systems and correctional facilities, but Tom Wells, Democrat for Florida's 3rd Congressional District. People, the primary is coming up. If you want to get involved, and we're not endorsing anybody, but if you want to get involved, go vote, go volunteer, go donate, and especially get involved. Bring friends and family.
And we can deal with different time zones.
Absolutely, we absolutely should. But again, people get involved, especially those of us, people who care about economic justice, social justice, foreign policy. If you're protesting and marching with your friends on the streets, you better bring them and another 5 additional friends to vote. 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 We've got to get change in this country through the ballot box.
All right, it's a privilege.
Tom Wells,